And welcome back. We have already seen how we can create text using different layers to do different things such as rotation and movement and stuff like that. But there are additional things that we can do to add different styles of animation. Specifically, if I were to go in here and create a new layer, and I'm just going to call this layer my text layer. And let's just go ahead and add to this with our text tool. We're just going to add a simple message in here called spring. And then of course I can take that message, I can center it, I might manipulate around the different pieces of it. So for example, I might increase the vertical spacing of this a little bit. Maybe say, maybe I want this to be 15. Just to space those out. That looks pretty nice. And when we use our free transform tool, we of course are familiar being to manipulate this around to resize it. In fact, if we look under our fill and stroke options here, you can see here's our free transform, and if I right click on this, we'll see we also have the option to rotate and skew or to scale, and that pretty much means that we can either rotate the direction of this text, we can skew it, which would of course allow us to bring it in or out, and of course as we saw we also had the option to scale, which would make it larger or smaller. Now that is pretty nice, but what if we wanted to do something else? So let's go ahead and see how we can create an animated banner here using this simple text. And to get started with that, I'm just simply going to right click on the text layer here, and I'm going to choose to break this apart. And one of the things you'll see that Animate does is it automatically will break this apart by letter, which is pretty nice for us. So we have each letter now kind of broken apart into its own box here, as you can see. And while this can be very helpful for what we can do, I actually want to take this one more level so I can work with each individual letter as kind of effectively a bitmap image. So I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to choose to break apart. And you can see when I do that, now each letter is now highlighted in such a way that it is effectively in its own piece here. So I can click on each letter individually, and that actually is a nice way to save me from having to go through and draw in each letter. And I know that these are all now positioned in a way that's going to be beneficial. Now, in order for me to set this up as an animation, let's go ahead and add in our appropriate number of frames here. So let's go ahead and just do a second and a half here. So we're going to do 45. So let's go ahead and just insert those frames here. And what I'm going to do is on that text there, at the beginning, I want this to start in such a way there, I'm going to lock this background so that all these letters start normal. But then maybe I want this to grow. Maybe I want it to kind of effectively make it get bigger, just to kind of help some how spring things grow. So what I can do is when these are selected here, you can see my options underneath have changed. We have smoothing, we have straighten. So these of course are changing here. When I go under my free transform tool now, you can see we also have the option to distort, and we have envelope. I'm just going to go ahead and click on envelope here, and you can see we now have these smaller dots around the normal free transformation box. What that's going to allow me to do is when I come to these, you'll notice that the mouse cursor is now kind of a white triangle, and I can actually grab this and I can actually pull this down in order to simulate this growing. I can do this in both directions. I can make this get larger. So what this would do is effectively, when we are setting this up, this is going to make it go and transform from the normal text into this larger text. So now we of course need to make our animation. So I'm just going to turn this into a shape tween. And you will see that as I play this animation, my text will grow. Now, of course, there can be other things that we can do with this. So if I wanted to have a different kind of envelope, let me just go ahead and add a new layer here. I'm just going to call this text 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the start of my timeline. Let's go ahead and choose our text. Let's make this one maybe more of a bright green. And I'm just going to go ahead and type over here the word grow. And maybe I'll take that one down in size a little bit. So let's do more like 100. And we can do the same thing as what we did before. We can right click, we can break this apart, break it apart again to make it more into a pixel format. And we can then take this and go to our free transform tool. We can go ahead and put our shape tween on here. And what I want this to do is when this is in my free transform options here, we can go ahead and manipulate it. Now you notice I don't have these options down here currently, and that's because I already applied this tween. So if I undo this to take the tween off, you can see we get our envelope options back. Now, besides enveloping, I can of course distort, and I just want to show how that would work. So if I were to go ahead and just lock the text, and I'm just going to go ahead and select this, so that way I can go ahead and use my different free transform options with my distortion. And I can make this so maybe this text is going to start distorted in such a way, or I can make it grow in different ways. But I want to maybe have this start normal. So I'm going to set this up so that way at frame 45, I'm going to, again, grab this whole thing here. Using my distort tool, I'm maybe going to grab this corner, and I'm just going to make this distort in a way so that this is growing this way. And of course, add my shape tween. And when I play this, you can see how that looks. Now, we do have some weird things kind of going on here with this W and O, so that might be something we have to play around with. But it is a pretty cool effect that we have going on right now. Now, we can do this with other things, so we can set this up with other effects that we saw with the envelope tool. We can stretch and distort these. We could make multi-frame animations here to kind of segment this. So maybe if I want to have the individual letters do something. So for example, maybe I want to go back to this O here, and I want to make it so that way it's not, doing that, not growing. Maybe I just want that O to stay the same size. We can set up keyframes if we want to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to do that right now, but you do have the option ability to still affect individual letters. You would just simply have to insert individual keyframes in here, so that way you could say, hey, I want this individual letter to come in here and be able to work with that.